Like to look at Abraham's test. Anytime God promises you something, he will usually test you. If he says, Guy, I'm going to put a church here for the world to see. It's going to be like a spider web. And I get all excited and I go, oh yeah, Lord. And then you realize that with the promise comes a test. And just when you think that you're tracking with God and he's partnering up with you and you can't lose, and there's truth in that too, you are tested. You are tested. And I would like to read about Abraham's failure. Because in chapter 12, we see that in verse number 7, he hears God. He's in the land that he's promised, and he builds an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. So Abraham had had God appear to him. Now, I've not had God appear to me. I've had God speak to me. I've had God direct me. I've had God give me evidences of his presence that is always there, but he's never appeared to me in a visible kind of way. And I probably would freak out. If you ever look at even when an angel would appear, people freak out, and the first words that angels always say, fear not. I know you're afraid, but don't be. And I don't know that I want to see him face to face until I'm in my new body and I can handle that. I'm looking forward to that day, by the way, and every day that I'm becoming more normal, whatever that is, as I heal up, I realize how close I was. And there's a week and a half. The first week I was in intensive care. And the next few days after being moved out of intensive care, I have no recollection of events, of people that visited or anything that happened to me in that whole period of time. And so I realized how close to death I was because I was hit in the head, and I still have a place back here. If I push, ow, it hurts still, and I can feel I don't know if there's a crack in my head. I guess there's no X-rays that would indicate such, but I can feel my whole head hurts if I touch this one spot. And so I'm getting better. I can move my head more each week, which is good. And but in the midst of that, I realized I could have been with Jesus today. And I'm sad that I'm not, but I'm happy to be here. Can I say that to you? I think of what it could be like being in his presence face to face. And honestly, with head injuries and naturally in the winter, people tend to be more depressed because there's not sunlight. And I love sunlight, and there's less of it. And I got hit in the head, and I don't have sunlight, and I've been more depressed now than I've ever been in my whole life, pretty much. And so I get that. And I get that what I've been walking through has been sort of a test. And I'm relating a little bit to that story here as I read about Abraham. God appears to him, he builds an altar, and he's living in tents in the promised land, verse 7. And verse 8 says that he went toward the hill, towards Bethel, and he pitched his tent in Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. And then Abram set out and continued toward Nigvah. Look at verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. Have you ever been promised by God? He's calling you. He says, leave your father, your mother, leave your family, come out of this land. I'm going to show you a new land, and I'm going to show you a city whose architect and builder is God. And I've got such a land that I'm going to use you to build, and you're going to see the city of God if you follow me. And he drops everything, counts it worthless compared to gaining what God wants to show him. And he leaves. And he's builds an altar to God, and he's calling on the name of God who has appeared to him. And God says, this is the land I'm going to give you. And Abraham goes, great. And then a famine arises, and it tests the promised land. The promise he spoke to Abraham is now a test by a famine. And in this famine, what was the reaction of Abraham? Was it go to the altar and worship God and call on the name of God in the midst of the famine and stay put in the land that God promised you and placed you into and gave you? Or was it to run to a land that had rivers that flooded and there was green grass for your animals? Should you stay with God in the famine, or should you go and walk by what you know and can rationally describe as green land, and should you go live in this place that looks better to you? And so now Abraham is really walking by fear. He's walking by sight. If I stay here, will I be able to care for my family? Will I be able to care for all my livestock? And God is promising me this land, but it looks like I'm going to have to leave this land and go to a land that looks green. And so he goes down and he lives in Egypt. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarai, and her name hasn't been changed and his name hasn't been changed yet, I know what a beautiful woman you are. And she said, well, I thank you. It's always good to tell your wife that, right? When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they let live. Say that you're my sister so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Abraham is like 75 years old, at least, and he's going down into Egypt, and he still thinks his wife is pretty hot. I look at TV and I look at people that used to be beautiful stars and now they're old women, and I think of the Betty White kind. And I think, oh, that's where everybody's heading. I have to let go of the importance of good looks because we're all going to lose it, right? And but Abraham evidently he thinks his wife is pretty nice looking, and he's not the only one. He's got agreement on his wife's appearance. And he says, I tell you what I want you to do. I'm thinking of this plan. As we get ready to go into Egypt, I know they're going to say, wow, what a nice looking lady. Just say that you're my sister so that I will be taken care of when they see you. And if you ever want to know the opposite of faith, it's conniving. It's working up your own plan. Because isn't it crazy how your brain thinks so fast about how to take care of yourself? And here we have Abraham not walking in faith. He's walking in fear. He's fearing that his wife will be noticed, that his life will be taken. And so he says, just so they treat me good, you lie, you tell them. And it's a half lie because half sister, yeah. Tell her you're my sister instead of the wife, and they'll treat me good because of you. And so I see Abraham here as not walking in believing in what God has said in faith, but walking in his own conniving plan. And he's working up a conniving way to make God's will happen in his own life instead of trusting God. And so the opposite of faith is conniving. It's manipulation. If you are manipulating, you are not, listen to me, you are not walking in faith. If you are manipulating, if you're conniving, if you're coming up with the plan to help God out, God doesn't need your help. Am I right? I keep telling myself that. And I like Abraham because I do this very same thing. And I like that God can use him in such a fantastic, fabulous way, even though he's full of frail weaknesses and he's lacking faith, and his faith is there's a big lapse in his faith. And he's been promised this by God, and now he chooses not to believe it, and he's got to cover his own way by making up this lie. And so when Abraham came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that she was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abraham well for her sake. Now, his conniving plan was working in the ways that man think. He said, I know how these Egyptians are. They're going to think like this, and so this is what I'm going to do. And he had it down the way people would be thinking, but he was acting in disobedience because he was leaving the promised land because of a famine. He was lacking faith to believe God could sustain him in a dry and desert land. And that's where you and I are living right now compared to where we're going. We're in this dry and desert land. And in the midst of that, we're making up our own plans to make God's will happen for our own lives. And we're trying to protect ourselves. And so he's reading them right, and he says she's very beautiful. Pharaoh, have you seen this lady? She's really nice looking. And so Pharaoh agrees, and he takes her into his palace. He treats Abraham well for her sake, and Abraham acquired sheep, cattle, male and female donkeys, men servants and maid servants, and camels. Now, Abraham is actually getting rich because of the looks of the appearance of his wife. And he's taking it. And God has promised to bless Abraham, but he's going to get this sort of blessing, but it's not going to be through an act of faith. It's going to be through an act of fear in a conniving kind of way. Now, we know what's going to happen. You've read this book. You've read this part about Hagar, have you not? Hagar, where did Hagar come from? She was acquired. Men servants and lady servants were given to Abraham, cattle and donkeys and sheep, and all of this was acquired during this time because Pharaoh wanted to make Abraham happy, to make him feel like, hey, it's good that you gave me your sister and all of this. And so I find it interesting because the provision that he gets from this lack of trust turns out to be kind of a curse, because he's going to have a child. And actually, can I say this? It's kind of Sarah's fault. Let's blame the wife. It's the woman you gave me. And, okay, you didn't like that. Half of you liked it, didn't you? And the other half did not. And what did Sarah say? Look, I can't have kids. Why don't you go into my handmaiden and have a child through her? And God will make the promise happen through this other manipulation. I'm going to give you her, and you have a child through her. And God will make that child our child, and the promise will come as God spoke through our offspring. It will come. And so you have a child with her, and it will be ours. And that's how God's going to work. Since God isn't acting like I want him to act, she will do. And so out of this time of seeming blessing, of lack of faith, comes forth the instrument which the slave woman is going to bear a child. Now we know in Galatians that God says, put away the child of the slave, put her away, and I'm going to give you a child, and you're to take that child, and that will be your offspring that I'm going to work through. And so we have this kind of Abraham's lapse. His faith just lets go, and he's trying to make things happen on his own. He's believing it, but he's not believing in the God to do it. He's believing that he can manipulate this thing into being. And so he gets all of these things. Now, it says, but God stepped in, and the Lord inflicted a serious disease on Pharaoh and his household because of Abraham's wife Sarai. Now, what is God doing? He's keeping Sarai from having intercourse with the Pharaoh because he does not want to corrupt the family heritage that's going to come through Sarai. going to bring about a miracle for them to conceive. And God is going to step in and say, you have failed. But in your failure, I am going to intervene. And I'm going to keep your wife from Pharaoh. And here's how I'm going to do it. They're going to get inflicted with a serious disease. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she's your wife? Why did you say she's my sister? So I took her to be my wife. Now then, here's your wife. Take her and go. Now, it must have been awful to be in disobedience, to leave the promised land, to go because of a famine, the test of the promise. You leave the promise behind and you go to what is logical and makes sense, where there's green so that your cattle can survive. And you go into this foreign place, it's not promised to you, and you find out that God is going to fulfill His promise. He's going to protect you, because Abraham's thinking right that his wife is nice looking and Pharaoh's going to take her and he's going to bless him because of her, and he's right about that. But he should have never been there, and in the blessing that he got from being in Egypt is going to be a wait for him in the future. Because here comes a line of the Arabs through Hagar. And we know that today there's a conflict between Arabs and Jews, between the offspring of Sarah's child and the offspring of the promised child. There's a conflict. And so we have God saving Abram, and he's now being rebuked by a godless, unrighteous king. Why did you lie to me? Here's your wife. Take her and stay here. No, go. Get out of here. Now, isn't it weird that God would use an unbelieving person to rebuke you about the promise that God has made to you? He should have said, wow, I really messed up. I'm sorry. I've been given this promised land. I left my altar where I met God. I left my tent in the promised land. And I left that to come here. And you're kicking me out. And you're sending me back to the promised land. Now, it doesn't tell us this, but the famine must still be going on. But he's discovering that walking in the promise in the midst of a famine is better than living where it's green and lush and being out of the will of God. Because God has stepped in and kicked him back out of where he's not supposed to be and sends him back to the promised land. Now watch this, because this is really interesting. Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abraham and to his men that they sent with him on his way, and with his wife and everything he had. So Abraham went up from Egypt to Nineveh with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Now, Lot is another story, because Abraham was told by God when he was called to leave Ur the Chaldees, to leave your father and your family and go to this land I will show you. It's a promised land that's flowing with milk and honey, and I'm going to show you the city that I'm going to build there. And he goes, how do I get there? Just follow me, and day by day, moment by moment. I'm not going to give you a map so you can act on your own. I'm going to walk with you, and in the walk is going to be really the important part. You're looking to me instead of the map is very important. And so he starts walking, and he's experiencing God, and he's worshiping God. He's building an altar to God, and there's no mention of an altar in Egypt. There's no mention of Abraham connecting with God in Egypt. Now, he does connect with him through an evil king who doesn't know God, by kicking him out and saying, why did you do this, you fool? You lied to me. And he's being rebuked by an unbelieving king. And he's set back on course by an unbelieving person. Have any of you ever, I know I must be unique, but isn't it embarrassing when you're rebuked by someone that doesn't know God? and you're supposed to be a person of faith. Isn't that kind of like embarrassing? Has that ever happened to you? And here's the thing, God leads and he whispers, and you keep going off course, and he starts talking louder. And I have found that some people, God will use the law to stop them, and they'll be thrown, back into the will of God by getting a probation or being thrown into jail or something. But some unbelieving unit is going to act as God's correction. And that's what's happened to Abraham. And now, because he's kicked out, he says, now get out of here. Where does he go? Back to where there's a famine. He discovers that it's better to be with God in a dry and weary land where there is no water than to be where things are green and lush and you collect a lot of provision, but God is not in it. And he goes back to where he first met God. He goes back to Bethel. Now watch this, it's very fun. From Nigba he went to place until he came to where? Bethel. To the place between Bethel and Ai where his tent had been earlier and where he had first built an altar. There Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Now it doesn't say Abraham called on the name of the Lord in Egypt. He was out of God's will. He was walking in his own logic, discovering that life, you may collect things and it may appear to be good, but it's really not, because God, you're not meeting God. He's not changing you. He's not meeting with you. He's not walking with you. You walk away from him and you find out what life is like without God in his personal presence. And so God uses an unbeliever to correct him and you and me. And it says, now Lot was moving about with Abraham, who also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together. For their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abraham's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at this time. So Abraham said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. Oh, great idea. Isn't it interesting how God works to separate Abram from Lot? Because what did God say when he called Abram and when he was in Ur of the Chaldees? Go alone, leave your family, leave your relatives, leave those who you like in the company of, leave them behind. And what does he do? He keeps his dad and says, now Dad, I got to leave Ur of the Chaldees, but they settle in, where is it, Haran or something, until his dad dies, and then he leaves, and then he crosses into the promised land, and then he meets up with God. And God reveals himself and he worships God in the place of promise, except Lot is still with him. And here comes a famine, and it's testing the promise. And he leaves the promised land to a place that looks better logically to him. He's walking by faith, walking by sight, not by faith. And he's in the wrong place in disobedience. And God is suddenly quiet, and he's not encountering God. He's walking on his own, and God kind of tells you sometimes, okay, you can go your own way and you can leave me behind. See if you can make it without me. Can you believe that God would do that? Can you believe that some of the greatest correction that God can bring is to let you go your own way, in your own plan, to let you get to the end of yourself where you think, wow, this isn't so good after all. I thought it was going to be better, but it's really not. And I find that sometimes, can I just be real honest with you? Because I don't think God is embarrassed like I'm embarrassed about my failures. He knows my heart. He sees things bound up in my heart. And he's got to get those things out of my heart. And I wish he'd come and, God, I wished it would be like Benny Hinn, where you get knocked down, you meet God, and you get up and you're different. Don't you wish it would be like Benny Hinn? You could just, bam, bam, you come up, line up, and we'll knock you all down like dominoes. And you'll come up and you'll be different and you'll be people of faith. And I overreacted. I'm sorry. God, do you like Benny? I'm sorry. Maybe you like him and I don't. Is that the case? But maybe I shouldn't be so hard on Benny Hinn. I'm sorry. I shouldn't joke like that. But we kind of like as Christians, we want to meet God in our own terms, do we not? If God will just knock me down on the floor and reveal himself and I get up and I'm a different person and suddenly those things that are in my heart bound up, I won't have to walk out and I won't have to hit the back of the Buick and I won't have to break my neck and my collarbone and my ribs and my cheekbone and I won't have to be in pain to learn some lessons. And I'm kind of in this place where in our best plan, my wife is like the ultimate, best planner. Who's the university guy, financial university? Dave Ramsey. He has nothing on my wife. Honestly, my wife is so good with budgeting and she's so good at paying our house off ahead of time and saving towards retirement, catching up from the lean years that we had. And now our house is paid off and we owe $82,000 because we didn't have insurance. In our best plan, haven't we done good planning? Yes, you really did well. Dave Ramsey would be so proud of my wife. He would be, honestly. We use credit cards, though. We don't believe him about we made a deal. The first month that we couldn't pay it off, cut them up. And we've paid them off every month. We've never paid a penny interest. And I believe you can beat Dave Ramsey if you want. If you can discipline yourself and have the Spirit of God tell you to do what we did. We told the first month that we can't pay a bill, we'll cut the credit card up. And you know what? Last year, we paid all of our product, the espresso machines and the syrups and all the stuff that we buy on credit cards. And we get $2,000 to $4,000 a year back from the credit card company for using the credit card, for charging all this money and paying it off, not paying 1 cent. We get $4,000, $5,000 last year, I don't remember, my wife knows, back from the credit card company. So the credit card company pays us and we don't pay it. Dave Ramsey, take that, put it in your pipe and smoke it because I can up you on that one and my wife is better than you. And I will tell you. So if you go to Dave Ramsey thing, he'll tell you to get rid of your... And if you're in debt making payments, minimal payments, you need to cut up your card until you get it paid off. But pay it off every month where you don't have to pay the card anything and no interest and let them pay you. Can I get a witness? Come on, let's get Pentecostal. Well, not everybody can do that, but my wife can. And so why am I getting off on this? I don't know. In our best efforts, we're in a place where we need God. And we're being driven to God. And we can pay it. I mean, there's ways we go get a home equity loan. Our house is paid off and it's 3% interest. And we can pay it off and not pay retirement and all that. We got a plan that Dave would be proud of. But I don't know if he doesn't want to do something crazy and different. It's his bill, right? Not mine. So, God, what do you think about this? And we're inviting him to meet with us. And this has driven us to the feet of Jesus. And it's a good place to be. And I thought my wife would be mad because she probably didn't want me to have the bike, and I got the motorcycle, and I crashed the motorcycle, and I hit a Buick. And so she could probably shake her finger under my nose and say, I told you so. But she's never done that. And so she's accepted that this is where God has got us, and we will seek him and follow his way. And perhaps we will meet him in some unpredictable way. We don't know. We don't really care. It doesn't matter. To be alive is sort of good. To be dead is better yet. But I'm accepting that that God is extremely jealous for me to have his will, and that's what we read in prayer meeting, that God is extremely jealous. extremely isn't the word. What was it? Exceedingly jealous. God doesn't use big words like that unless he means it. And so he's exceedingly jealous for us to have God's will, and he will allow me to go through where I've gone so that I can have his will. And I must not walk by my own understanding. I must call out to God. And I'm in a place where I need him, and I want him. And I don't want to trade that with anything. And I hope you can understand with what I'm trying to say. And so we have here Abraham is being separated from Lot because Lot and him were hanging together and it wasn't God's will. So how did God separate them? He blessed them both so much that they couldn't stay together. I don't know about you. And somebody said this to me. Well, why does it take a wreck? Why can't God meet you on a vacation in the Bahamas? Well, he could. He could meet me there. He's chosen to hit the head and bust the neck, and I'm happy. My mind's pretty much back, not quite, but almost there. And I'm happy to be back in the will of God, independence with him, and it's a sweet place for me to live. And I don't know, some of you have said, we've noticed you're different, and I hope you do notice something. I don't know that it's that noticeable, but I hope you notice. But wouldn't it be nice if God did his will for you by blessing your socks off? Like, I'm going to bless Lot so much with his herds and your flocks so much that you will not be able to stay together because there's not enough green pasture for all your flocks. And the herdsmen are bickering and they're fighting. And do you remember what it was to bring Paul and Barnabas into the will of God? They had a big blow-up fight. And Barnabas went his way, and Saul, who became Paul, went his way. And God separated them because it was his will. But part of it was a fight. And so I know that we all screw up and we fight and bicker. How many know that churches do better at fighting than any other sociological group? But Pastor, my mother bought this carpet. We can't change that color. It's like, oh, please. You know what I'm saying? And we split churches over what color carpet are on the floor. And we bicker and fight. And some churches, he wants them to be, I shouldn't say this. I don't mean to be arrogant. But we've planted 8 churches intentionally without having to fight over carpet colors to get people out of here. Are you glad? I think that's the better way to do church planting, is Planned Parenthood. You're looking for people God is raising up, you know? And God has raised up so many people. And it's so much fun. It's not fun for me not to be here for 3 weeks when I was in the hospital, but it's been fun to leave and know that, man, the church is going to be in good hands. And not only is Adam amazing, which taught last week, and Eldon is amazing, but we've got like lots of other people that could come up here, and I probably should just let them do it more, but I'm too selfish. I like to teach, and so you get me week after week, and you wish that I would go on vacation. Maybe you ought to send me to the Bahamas every winter or Hawaii so that other people could have an opportunity. But we've been walking in planned kind of ways to do what we feel is God's will. And we've given away some really awesome people. I miss them. My heart grieves over some of the people who are not here that are my dear friends. And don't you know that they're better off? And I'm not better off, but they're better off because they're being used in a needy place. And I believe that God separated Abram and Lot because they failed to do what God said. God says, okay, I'll do it for you. I'm going to bless your socks off so much that you can't be together in the same place. Because you got too many too much livestock. And Abraham says, let's not fight. We're brothers. And so this is what he did. And I really liked how Abraham... Now, Abraham has learned from his failure. Can I tell you that? What's he going to do at this point? He's like, okay, Lot, you go over here. I'm going over where it's really green. Let's read this story because it's pretty interesting. And you may want to get your pen out and underline because this is really good. It says, let's not part company. He says, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. You pick and I'll take what's left. Now, how many of you know that the elder usually gets the first say? And who's the elder? Abram. I'll tell you what, Lot, I'm going over here. Why don't you go over there? No. Abram has learned something about choosing by sight. And he says, I'll tell you what, you make the decision and I'll take the leftovers and I'll be happy because God has promised to bless me and I'm back on track with God. I've met God and you choose, and wherever you go, God's going with me the other direction. And this is what happened. So look at what happened. So Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered like a garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, towards Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, which is the promised land, and Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So where did Lot choose? It appears to Lot that it's green over here and it looks better, and I'm going to choose by sight, not by faith. And I'm going toward what looks good, rationally is good. I'm moving that way. Okay? And Abraham says, fine. I'll go to Canaan land. It looks dry and barren over there, but God's going with me, and you go your direction and I'll go mine. And he goes and he starts his downfall. Now Abraham comes back to faith. His return to faith is by coming back to where he last heard God speak. And perhaps this is a good word for some of you. You say, I don't hear God. Well, go back to where he last said. Have you done that? No. Well, go back. Go back to Bethel. And so you go back and you meet God where you left him. And so he goes back to where he was in the promised land. And he separates from Lot because that's not God's will. And it's caused by a blessing. And it's caused by... Lot chooses by a place by sight and reason. And Abraham is confident that in God. And he lets Lot choose whichever way you want to go. And then he meets God after he separates from Lot. Look at verse 14, because this is so good. So good. This is so underlined, and I have a star by it. That's my exclamation point. Put a little star there. You underline everything that's good, and it's all pretty good, so you underline too much. And then you got to find another way, so you double underline, and then you put a star by it, and that's my exclamation point. And here it is. My star is by verse 14, and there's double underlined words here. You ready? Then the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot, and I underlined the word after. You could double underline after, because that's your exclamation point maybe. Then the Lord said, after Lot had parted from him. I'm not going to talk to you as long as Lot's there. I called you to leave your family, and you brought Lot with you. And now I'm going to make you go different ways, and I'm going to bless you. Out of blessing, you're going to have to go. And I love when God disciplines me with blessing. That's enough to make a Presbyterian shout. That was just a joke. And I haven't used that for so long, I thought I'd better pull it out of my repertoire. And after Lot parted, and it's like, okay, Abram, you're supposed to separate from your family, and since you won't do it, I'll do it for you. It's too tight here. It's not enough. Choose and part company. And they parted company. Then the Lord said, after Lot had parted from him, this is what the Lord said, lift up your eyes. He says, I'm not going to speak to you until Lot goes. Now Lot's gone. Look up. Lift up your eyes. And he says, this is what? And this is the promise. From where you are, and look north and south and east and west. And all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Now, I'm going to give you so many offspring, it's going to be like the whole land is dusty. You pick up and you try to count and you can't. And then you pick up handfuls and buckets fulls and you still can't count, because that's how I'm going to bless your offspring. Now, when they separate, God starts speaking and leading again, like he had before. Because now he's in the place where he's supposed to be. And even though Abraham is a miserable failure at following God, he gets it after he fails. And he doesn't have the guts to do what he's supposed to do. So God kind of does it for him, and then he talks to him again. He says, now, I want you to lift up your eyes, look north, south, east, west, look all around you. Can you count the dust in your hand? No, but there's more dust than you can pick up with your hands, and that's what your offspring's going to be. So he's speaking the promise again. His offspring and the land that you get. Look north, south, east, and west. It's yours. I'm giving it to you. It's the land I've brought you and promised you. So look north, look south, look east and west. Now, it's different for us. What we did is we looked north and we went up to exit 59, and there are now two sites in exit 59. There's Huntington, that's north, you know. Look south, we've got one in Indianapolis. Look east. Look west, we've got Anderson. We need something on the east side, I suppose. And maybe we're not done planting churches. Look at geographical areas and look at offspring. My blessing toward you is in geographic areas, and it's in offspring. Both. And so Abraham is getting his mind blown by these 2 points. And so, go walk through the land and the breadth of the land that I'm going to give you. So here's an exercise. And I can relate to this a little bit. I would drive north, I would drive south, I would drive east, and I would drive west since it's winter. But isn't it more effective when you're walking? You have more time to think, there's less distraction, there's no radio, and you're just you and God walking. You're hoofing with God, if I can use that term. And you're taking in so much because of the quietness as you walk. And he says, I want to walk with you through the land. And I want to show you the breadth and the length and the width of the land. And I want you to do this exercise that's going to show you the vastness of the promise. Because the promise is so good, it's going to take you a long time, so walk it. And they start walking, and they do east, north, south, east, and west. Now, I'm going to skip the first part of chapter 14, because it's the first war in the Bible. And gosh, I hate to skip the first war in the Bible. But we got kings that are fighting and bickering. And we skip down to verse 8. Then the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, the king of these, then they aligned themselves with these other kings of Zeboim and the king of Bela and all of these. And they formed together. And they formed against this other group of kings. And in verse 11, the 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah. So the first king's group, Amphiel, and his group of kings beat Sodom and Gomorrah's kings in their alliance of kings. Okay? And it says they seized all of the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food, and then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and all his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. Now, Lot's going to have a downfall because he's going to have failure. And his failure is going to be by walking by sight. It looks green over there, I'm going to move towards it. So he moves towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's outside of them. And it says that Sodom and Gomorrah was more wicked than anything, and they were sinning against God. And now he's living in Sodom. Hello. First he moved towards Sodom. Then he was still outside of the city of Sodom, because Sodom and Gomorrah is so sinful that he's living outside of them. And now he's living, as it says in verse number 12, since he was living in Sodom. He kept moving closer and closer and closer and further away from God and closer to the sinfulness of the city. Now, and one who had escaped went back to Abram and reported to Abraham the Hebrew. Now, Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre, and he's living in this place, and this guy comes and he says, look, they took Lot and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they plundered their goods. And so here's what he does in verse 14. Abraham heard that his relative had been taken captive. Now, this is how you get taken captive. You look towards what looks good, you move towards it, and you find that there's sin, so you live outside the city, and then you move inside the city, and you're more comfortable with the sin than you are with the promise, and then you are taken captive. Boy, there's a lot of good preaching there, but I won't go there. And so Abraham takes these 318 trained men born in his household, and he went to pursue them. And during the night, Abraham divided his men to attack and rooted them out, pursuing them as far as Hobrah, north of Damascus. And he recovered all the goods that he brought back, his relative Lot, and all of his possessions, together with the women and the other people. After Abraham returned from defeating this king and all these allies, the king of Sodom came to him in the valley. So he's going to have two kings visit him. One is the king of Sodom, and he's going to say, hey, and it says it right here, and it says that the king of Sodom in verse 21 said to him, give me the people and you keep the goods for yourself. And Abraham said, I have raised my own hand to the Lord, my God most high, creator of heaven and earth, and have taken an oath that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even the thread of the thong of your sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abraham rich. So this king comes to him and he says, look, just give me the people, you take all the goods, and I'm happy. And Abraham says, no, you take the goods, I will take nothing from you, because I'm blessed of God and I'm trusting God, not you. And you will not be able to say that I made Abraham rich, because God is reserving that right for himself. And then he does this in verse 18. He meets another king, Melchizedek, king of Salem. And you can read about this in chapter 7 of Hebrews. He brought out bread and wine. Who is Melchizedek? He's the king of peace, the king of Salem. Hebrews 7 says he has no genealogy, he has no father, he has no mother, he has no beginning, no end, and he's a priest of the Lord forever. So he's eternal. Who is it? I'm going to suggest to you that it's Jesus before he came in Bethlehem. And what did Melchizedek, or this priest of God, offer him? Bread and, wow, do I need to preach this? What's the Lord say every time we take communion? Take this bread, it's my body, which is broken for you. Take this cup, it's a new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. And so he refuses to be blessed by Sodom, and he's blessed by the high priest of the Almighty God, who has no beginning, no end, and offers him bread and wine. And he meets him. And guess what this king does? And this is what we'll close with. And I'm over time. And it's too good to not do. He says, he blessed Abraham, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High." Now, this is so good. Blessed be Abraham, and blessed be God. Can I tell you something that really is wrong thinking that I'm being confronted with over and over and over, and it's wrong? I don't think God really wants to bless me, and so I beg him for blessing. And he says, "Don't beg me for blessing. My blessing for you is honor for me." But see, I want to earn it, and I can't. But God says, you're blessed by God on high, and God is blessed to have you for himself. Do you feel blessed to be God's? I mean, I do, but you do too. But do you think God is blessed to have you? No, he's stuck with me, Pastor. It's like, no, he left heaven. He came and sought you out. In your depression and your sin and your grossness, he chose you. And he's blessed to have you as his child. There's a parable that I'll close with. It's this story here, actually. God is blessed to deliver you from the hands of your enemies because God's blessed when that happens. When you're in battle, God is blessed when you trust and you win. It's like the parable of the hidden. A guy bought an earth, a piece of ground, and he buried a treasure in it. And when someone found the treasure, they bought the whole plot just for the treasure. Can I tell you this? God bought the whole planet Earth to get you because you're the treasure. I think we need to just applaud God for that, don't you? He bought, yeah. God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever would believe in him would be his prize. That whoever would believe would not perish but have everlasting life. I don't know if you feel God is blessed to have you. Well, God stuck with me, Pastor, and he doesn't like me, but he's stuck with me. It's like, no, you're a treasure. You get the idea that he likes Abraham, and Abraham is a total screw-up. And God chose him out of Ur of the Chaldees to be the father Abraham, the father of promise. Can you applaud God choosing a failure like Abraham? Can you do that today? Can you applaud God choosing you? That you're a treasure? Yeah. I would apologize, but I'm really not sorry that I went over. I just love this truth of this. If you guys get this, you'll never be the same, and it's so good not to be the same. So stand with me. Lift up your voice to Jesus who chose you, a miserable failure, and his name is Redeemer because he's redeeming you out of your failures. Amen. Amen. Give it to him, okay?
Our hopes. We have raised our hopes and our cities high. We have followed fragile dreams, but only one could take the measure of our goals. And we've We've stumbled over the trials of life, and we've wrestled the unseen. But only one can calm the storm inside our souls. In the hands of God, in the hands of God, we will fall. Rest for the restless and the weary, hope for the sinner. In the hands of God, we stand tall. Hands out almighty to deliver, bringing us freedom. When our strength gave way, to the weight of guilt, till we strain for every breath. Only one could lift our shame and make us well. And when all is finished and we face the fearsome power of death, only one overcomes the gates of hell. In the hands of God, we will fall. Rest for the restless and the weary, hope for the sinner. And in the hands of God, we stand tall. Hands out almighty to deliver, giving us freedom. Sing, you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing, you are, and you're amazing, you're amazing, you are, and we praise you, Lord, for what your hands have done. You're amazing, you're amazing, you are. In the hands of God, we will fall. Rest for the restless and the weary, hope for the sinner. And in the hands of God, we stand tall. Hands out almighty to deliver, but giving us freedom. You're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing, you are, and you're amazing, you're amazing, you are, and we praise you, Lord, for what your hands have done, 'cause you're amazing, you're amazing, you are.
Blessed be the God who chose people who have such failure in their lives. Know that God is not surprised at your failure, just as he wasn't with Abraham, but he committed to bring Abraham back. And God is calling you, and you may have doubts, and that's part of the walk. Overcoming is overcoming doubts, overcoming failure. Overcomer is what God calls you. And I bless you, the chosen ones, to be overcomers of failure. I bless you to overcome all that you have not done in your own. May God do through you, and may he be glorified. In your doubts, may he firm you up, just as he did with Abraham. God doesn't reject you. He gathers you back. Would you accept being gathered back by God? Would you accept God choosing such a weak, frail person And would you just honor him by redeeming you out of failure and doubt to be his child, that he's not ashamed to call his own. And may God display you proudly as his work when he returns. Amen.